Hello, it's me again. Last time I took a look at a bunch of games based on IPs that I don't really know about at all. I mean, Ninja Hattori-kun, and that game that has the penguin ghost in it. No, I need something in more familiar territory, which in my case I suppose would be classic Western animation. Suffice to say, I was not a Toonami kid, I was a Boomerang kid. No, not that. Enter Tom and Jerry, the ultimate game of cat and mouse for the NES, aka Tom and Jerry, best of the best for the Famicom. This is a game that I've owned for a while, but never actually finished. That's sadly the case with the majority of the games I own. For as much as I play the games in my collection, I rarely have the fortitude or perseverance to actually finish them. This particular game was originally released to American markets, courtesy of High-Tech Expressions. For many of you, that name might not inspire any feelings whatsoever. For those in the know, however, it is a name that will strike fear and terror inside you before you even start playing it. Forget LJN, this company's games really represent what the bottom tier NES publishers had to offer. Almost everything that they'd released up to this point fell into two categories: edutainment for very small children, and some of the worst console games ever made. These are the jokers behind the likes of Barbie, Orb 3D, and the downright heinous Muppet Adventure Chaos at the Carnival. However, there is cause for hope. Unlike those games which were made by shitehouse studios such as Imagineering and Software Toolworks, this was created by Manchester development house Software Creations. They didn't have a great track record on the NES either, but there was some real talent there. You had virtuosos Tim and Jeff Follen, as well as John and Steve Pickford, the creative minds behind Plock. That game's existence in itself is a good omen, and here's another one, the New Zealand story for the NES. There were some very poor conversions of this game for other systems, including the considerably more powerful PC Engine. Software Creations aced it with this one though, with the gameplay kept intact and a great remix of the soundtrack to boot. And with that in mind, it's time to pop this video game in and play the game. It gets off to a promising start. The art is as good as you can expect for an 8-bit game, and it's got that classic Follen soundtrack to get you going. Specifically Jeff Follen in this case, and he does an excellent job of taking themes from the cartoons and adapting them to his arpeggio-heavy style. But hold on, Tom and Jerry and Tuffy? I haven't even started the game yet and it's already having an identity crisis. And yeah, Tuffy, that grey mouse that no one liked, he's in the game, for one screen in the intro. It's like making a soccer game without a player's license, and then sticking Ryan Bloody Giggs on the cover. Actually, I should take that back. Tuffy is a much better character than Ryan Giggs. Start the game, and it's a rudimentary platformer to the surprise of no one. The platforming itself has a distinct New Zealand story feel to it, since you can jump through most of the ceilings, and the levels tend to follow a winding path much like that game. Of course, being a mouse, everything around you is much bigger than most games, which is distinctive but not quite unique. The graphics are interesting because the characters look great in 8-bit, but the backgrounds vary in quality. The first level in particular could have done with some more colour and detail, particularly on the boxes. My first real issue comes with actually trying to attack the enemies. I think it's fair to say that Jerry has one of the worst attacks I can remember from any NES game. Chip and Dale can pick up and throw boxes, Scrooge McDuck has a pogo walking stick, the Ninja Turtles have their weapons from the cartoon, Muttley has bombs which are larger and have a blast radius when they hit something, even James Bond Jr. has a fucking gun. Jerry, meanwhile, is armed with the OxyClean detergent ball.
Are you on the ball?
Wow, what's this?
It's new OxyClean detergent. Get on the ball.
It's no wonder this house has so much vermin, he's been stealing the cleaning supplies the whole time. How is Jerry able to hold on to all of them anyway?
A year's supply of OxyClean detergent takes up no space at all.
For what it's worth, it's not as much of a problem as it could be because the controls are solid. Jerry moves around quickly, and the jumping is more or less on a par with any other platformer on the console. The first set of levels might take some practice to beat, but it's one of those games that's less daunting to play if you do it methodically. There's no timer, and therefore no need to rush through the levels. The boss fights seem a bit unusual though. First off, am I really supposed to believe that Tom is 100 times bigger than Jerry? I'd have an easier time believing that Can't Buy Me Love was originally performed by the Beagles. Can't buy me love! This part is simple enough. but it bugs me that the game doesn't refill your health when you beat a level. For instance, I got to this boss with one hit left, beat it, and then died about halfway into the next level because I couldn't find any health. There's also this awkward jump towards the end where getting hit by a fly will knock you off the bottle and take some fall damage, and even if you make the jump you might crash into this enemy. It is possible to land here and run below the enemy, which is just weird. The annoyances really start with this level, because you're frequently being attacked by acorns and what appear to be plastic spoons. I have to keep orienting the camera so I have time to dodge them, and there's also an awkward jump with this bit of wood blocking it, so you have to do a light jump to make it. The second boss is simple enough, but what's going on here? Tom's asleep, surely you could just sneak past him into the next level, but no, you have to attack some wasps, and get them to attack Tom by hitting them multiple times with the balls. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but let's just go with it. Now, level 1 can either be really short or kind of difficult. The trick here is to have some bubblegum or whatever it's supposed to be in your inventory. Yeah, you might not have noticed at this point because I haven't explained it, but you can collect a few items over the course of the game, and they're usually context sensitive. But there are certain ones that I never really figured out how to use. For instance, there's this hammer on level 1, and I assumed it was a weapon, but then I tried to attack the enemies, only to either miss because of the delay in the animation, or it did absolutely nothing. So yeah, I just never figured out how that worked. But the bubblegum can actually be quite useful, especially on this level. But here's the thing, getting to this level with the bubblegum is harder than it sounds, because using a continue causes you to lose any items you have, and certainly the first couple of times you play this, you're liable to use a continue before you get this far. These acorns are a bastard to deal with too, because they'll sometimes defy gravity and bounce higher for no reason. It's not that bad because there's a set pattern, but it's still weird nonetheless. The leaves are also a bastard because they're difficult to hit. Oftentimes they're placed very slightly above or below where you can actually hit them, and they will also knock you off platforms. Eventually I got to level 3 too, where the enemies are gone and instead you have to run by some flames. This can take quite a bit of practicing, since you sometimes have to dodge 2 of them at the same time. I also came across this weird bug where the flames occasionally don't spawn for about 10 seconds. Oh, that's fair. The boss is the real problem though. The flames are hard to dodge consistently, and unlike the first battle, you have to hit Tom about, 20 times to win. Ah shoot, I died. Well, time to use another continue, I guess. So I restart the boss fight. I pressed the fucking continue button. Or, hold on, let's review that footage again. You motherfuckers. You only get 2 continues to beat the whole game? Okay, that on its own doesn't sound that bad, given that many games at the time force you to beat them on 1 credit. But here's the real problem. The game gives you no indication that it limits the amount of continues that it gives you. When you see a screen like this, you might reasonably assume that you have an infinite amount of them. But no, this is the game designer being a bastard and deciding not to type a number on screen to let you know how many you have left. Regardless, I choose to persevere through the first 3 sets of levels again, and this time I make it to the boss having used just 1 continue this time around. Here's how the boss fight went. I did eventually manage to win, but just look at all of those lives I burned, and now I have to beat another 2 sets of levels with hardly anything left. Maybe if I can get some health early on I might have a Oh. Did you catch that? Let's get an action replay. Best of the best? Bastard of the bastards, more like. Oh, there's some health! If I have to do it all over again, and have to do the bits all over again, and then the game decides to erase all of my progress because it arbitrarily decided that I died 1 too many times, well, you saw how that last boss fight went. I could do it again. I could do it 15 times over again, and I might only make a couple of inches worth of progress. Well, fuck that. I'm not defeated yet, however. You see, the 90s was a period of determination and progress and making video games unnecessarily hard to combat the supposed rental market problem. The idea was that by making the game harder, you could be sure that people wouldn't be able to beat the game during the rental period. In reality, doing this was more likely to make people not want to play the games after renting them. One country which didn't have a game rental market was Japan, so let's see what they got. While my Famicom copy is clearly not official, the game did in fact get a legit release in Japan. It's unusual for a Western developed NES game to receive any kind of distribution over there. Indeed, out of the 1,000+ games available for the Famicom, a mere 24 of them were made outside of Japan, and that includes some real stinkers such as RoboCop 2, which I consider to be one of the worst games ever made. Okay, I say there are 24, some people might want to count Final Fantasy III among that, since much of it had to be made in California due to visa issues, but that's stretching it a bit. This version was localized by Altron, about 11 months after the original release. But wait, who even are Altron anyway? The first thing to know is that they have no association with Baltron or Caltron to my knowledge. The second is that as far as publishers go on the Famicom, they're actually rather unique. Rather than develop games themselves or even outsource any game development, they were the only ones to focus exclusively on localizing existing NES games. Their previous titles consist of Paperboy, the NES version being the only one that I've ever liked. There's also the originally unlicensed NES version of Super Sprint, and a game based on the Untouchables. People don't talk about this one, probably because it's shit. Poor Kevin Costner couldn't catch a break when it came to video games, but that's inevitable when Ocean's involved. Of course, Altron didn't just localize games from the NES, they also localized games for the Super Famicom, the Mega Drive, and the Game Boy, including all of the Tom and Jerry games released on those consoles. This is unfortunate, since the Super Nintendo game is actively terrible. Seriously, if you want to see a bad Tom and Jerry game, just go play that version and you'll be running back to the NES version. They did eventually set up an in-house studio, but their first original games were released for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. During that time, they seemed to focus on puzzle games, and then eventually games based on Western IPs. It sort of came full circle, though I don't believe they ever worked on any other Tom and Jerry games. Tom and Jerry was Altron's final Famicom game. I doubt it made much of a splash, especially since the Famicom was really on its way out by November 1992. Not even the greatest print ad in history could make this one a hit. It may look identical to the NES version. But what's this? You start the game with 5 lives instead of 3? Also, notice something else different about this first screen? Here it is compared to the NES game. Notice that the chattering teeth at the start are missing. The actual levels appear to be the same except for this one jump on level 2-2, but it seems that a few enemies were also taken out. And look at this, if you beat the level without full health, you get your health restored! Okay, admittedly, I don't know if the differences between versions are to do with the rental market. The Famicom version was released almost a year later by a different publisher, so maybe Altron were just trying to polish the game. In any case, they did seem to agree with me that the game was too difficult originally. I make it back to that third boss, and it turns out it's much easier here. The flames don't spawn as frequently, and Tom seems to take about half as many hits as he did before. Here's my favourite moment though. Level 4-1 originally had a NES in the background, so for this version you might assume that they would replace it with a Famicom or maybe some other object. But no, they just took the NES and erased all of the text on it, which makes it look more like one of those bootleg plug-and-play tap consoles. These purple balls now perish after one hit, but they're still a bastard to hit, so that only helps so much. Even here, the game does crank up the difficulty by the time you get to this point. Level 4-2 does create a couple of issues on its own. Up until this point, you could jump through any platform, but not here. On this level, the ceilings are solid, and you have to use this tiny drill to get through some walls. Not only is the platforming in general inconsistent when compared to the previous levels, but you can only drill through certain walls. There's no clear graphical indication as to which, and you're stuck with trial and error, or maybe using the console's sprite limitations to your advantage. These electric currents are often hard to avoid, and occasionally seem to spawn in out of nowhere. I also have no idea how you're supposed to avoid taking damage on this part. Maybe I just took the wrong route, but who knows. But whatever, I make it to Tom once again, and here he is. This time he throws what appear to be the bounciest broken fuses I've ever seen. I was stuck on this one for a while, but much like the second boss, it is possible to get into a pattern and beat it that way. He does take a lot more hits than the previous one though, which is concerning. Level 5 is where the frustration kind of comes to a head, however. It's not so bad on 5-1, though the awkward placement of the enemies often makes them difficult to hit, and unlike many of the others in the game, it's kind of hard to just avoid them. There's also this one jump on the level, and I have no idea how you're supposed to do this without taking fall damage. Maybe if I was pixel perfect I could land on the platform to the right, but that's such a tight jump if that's true, so I'm hoping that I just missed something obvious instead. 5-2 on the other hand is one of the most frustrating levels I can remember, and I played through Tomb Raider a couple of months back. On the PlayStation no less, where you could only save once in specific places. Anyway, the enemies on this stage are relentless, the ghosts are fast and often placed in spots where the platforming is hard enough without the enemies. The vampire mice are the real problem though. Like some of the other enemies, they have random and erratic movement patterns, but these are much worse because they can fly, so you can't simply jump over them. There seem to be about as many enemies on this one level as there are in the rest of the game combined. Well, that's my second continue gone, time to restart. Hold on, I actually get to continue in this game? Let's do it. I'm not going to lie, it took me so many attempts to beat this level. I lost count, but I'm certain it was more than 9. I don't know how many continues this version has. I'd like to say it's infinite, but I also don't want to risk being wrong about that. One goof on my part is that there actually does exist a weapon upgrade on this level. See this ball at the start? Turns out you can collect it and you get a larger ball attack that's easier to hit the enemies with. You won't see that in this video because I wasn't aware of this until after I'd finished the game. One final gripe with this level in particular is that you need a key to finish it, despite the exit just being a nondescript area in the top right corner. You wouldn't know that you needed a key here if you were going into it blind, like they could have at least drawn a door in the background or something. Let's not forget about the final boss though. I got stuck here for a while, but that's mainly because the pattern that Tom uses can take a while to figure out. Remember when I mentioned the inconsistent number of hits that he takes to defeat? This is where it really becomes a problem, at least in this version. After landing about 50 hits on him, I began to second guess myself. Am I supposed to just hit him over and over? Surely you're supposed to use the rockets, like maybe you deflect them towards his face or something. But no, you are supposed to just hit him over and over in the face. It's strange, because even if Tom took about 8 hits for every boss, he would still become gradually more difficult just like the levels do. But hey, I actually finished the game! Tuffy shows up again because they had to justify the title somehow, and I get an ending screen in Japanese. Not that it matters, I'm not exactly playing Metal Gear or anything like that. Also note that the whole game was apparently made by 3 people, an impressively small team for a 1991 console game. In the end, my take on this is that the NES version is a near miss. It can be fun at times, but too often the game works against you with a weak attack, limited tries, and the occasional cheap deaths. The Famicom version, on the other hand, is actually quite good, and it's the version I recommend playing. It doesn't punish you as harshly as the NES version does, which here I would cite as a positive. Some might prefer the punishment, but when the design isn't quite rock solid, combining that with a high difficulty level can really spoil the game for me. For all of my issues that apply to both versions, I actually do like the Famicom version quite a bit. It's still unpolished to some degree, and it does become frustrating towards the end, but the challenge is far from insurmountable. Is it one of the best licensed games on the console? Well, it's having to compete with games like DuckTales, Batman, and Bucky O'Hare, so probably not. I'd still happily call it one of the better licensed games on the Famicom though. Compare this with the games from my 40k video, such as Ninja Hattori-kun, or even the Z Gundam game, which I do like. Just be careful with how you play this one. Aside from the official cartridges, you can often find it on the fake NES mini consoles, which seems fitting, but they always seem to use the NES version. It's odd because they insist on using the Japanese versions of so many other games where the language is the only difference. There are also pirate ROM hacks based on the NES version, such as Bruce and Leo, and the all-time classic Golden! Gotta catch 'em all? I'll just stick with my MS Paint Eevee, thank you very much. So in conclusion, thank you Software Creations, thank you Altron, I'll even thank High-Tech Expressions even if their version isn't that great. Just leave the OxyClean to Billy Mays next time.
Get on the ball!